Hello, my name's Dr. Shaham Das. I'm a consultant forensic psychiatrist. I assess mentally disordered offenders in courts, in prisons, and in secure psychiatric units. I'm also the host of a YouTube channel, A Psych for Sore Minds. Just wanted to say thank you to my boy Mr. Miles for collaborating with me on this video. His informative and well-researched first piece relayed details of the first trial of Sally Clark's conviction. This is part 2 of that video, and I'm going to inform you about the mistakes within the expert evidence and how Sally Clark was vindicated, yet despite that, however, tragedy still struck. So I'm an expert witness. I regularly give evidence for psychiatric issues in criminal court trials. So in this episode, I'm also going to give you my personal and professional insights into why the expert evidence was flawed, and also how this was kind of a big deal and it shook up the medico-legal world. So at Sally's trial, expert medical opinion was divided. Several leading paediatricians testified that the deaths were probably natural, though experts acting for the prosecution diagnosed that the babies had been shaken to death or smothered. But then, the evidence of Roy Meadow doomed Sally Clark's future. So who was this man? Sir Professor Roy Meadow was a renowned and highly respected paediatrician. In fact, in 1998, he was knighted for services for child health. And in 1977, he was the first person to describe a phenomena which has since been dubbed as Munchausen syndrome by proxy. And in case you're interested, I've got a whole series of videos about Munchausen's and Munchausen's by proxy, defining what it is, giving you some real-life criminal case examples. I think it's fair to say that some of Sir Professor Meadow's work was at least controversial. For example, he stated in a book that was called The ABC of Child Abuse that, and I quote, "In a single family, 1 sudden infant death is tragedy, 2 is suspicious, and 3 is murder until proven otherwise." And this kind of echoes the damning evidence that he gave in Sally Clark's case. In fact, he called this Meadow's Law, and it was influential in the UK for social workers and also for child protection agencies such as the NSPCC, which you might have heard of, the National Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children. So Meadow claims to have uncovered 81 apparent cot deaths, which were in fact murder. So what is the expert evidence that he proposed in Sally's case? So he testified that the odds against 2 cot deaths occurring in the same family was 1 in 73 million, and was only likely to occur about once every 100 years in all of England, Scotland and Wales put together. He even went way beyond his expertise to make what I think is a slightly glib statistical analysis. He compared the chances of this happening to backing an 80-1 outsider at the Grand National and winning for 4 successive years. The figure of 1 in 73 million was arrived at by squaring 1 in 8,353, where 1 in 8,353 is the chance of there being 1 incident of SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome, in a family, especially in a family like Sally Clark's. However, it has since been proposed that this estimate was highly dubious. But crucially, even if that probability was accurate, squaring it to arrive in 1 in 73 million is flawed because it makes the assumption that the deaths are completely independent events, whereas in fact there might be hidden relevant environmental and genetic factors that means that if 1 SIDS has occurred in a family, then the chances of a second is higher than that. So much later down the line, a professor of mathematics and statistics took all of the knowledge into account. His name was Ray Hill, and he estimated the odds of Sally Clark being guilty were actually between 4.5 or 9-1. So obviously a completely different number to what Professor Roy Meadow calculated. So the jury returned a guilty verdict and Sally Clark was sent to prison. She was convicted in November 1999. She was apparently frequently the target of other female prisoners, probably due to the fact that A, she was a solicitor, but more importantly, her conviction as a child killer. So to the shock of many public figures, including some expert statisticians, as well as people in the legal profession, there was a Court of Appeal case in October 2000, but that did not overturn the murder conviction. However, shortly afterwards, a campaigning lawyer was determined to find justice. So they obtained new evidence from another expert witness in the original case, and that was a Home Office prosecution forensic pathologist who had failed to disclose other important and relevant evidence, including some microbiological reports from medical tests. This indicated the second child had actually died from a bacterial infection and not from smothering, as the prosecution had claimed. So Clark was released from prison having served 3 years of a sentence already, but unfortunately the psychological damage was already done. Not only was she convicted of murder and imprisoned falsely, but she was targeted in prison, and then on top of all that, being in prison separated her from her third infant. So she apparently never recovered from the psychological trauma, and tragically, Sally Clark died unintentionally in March 2007 from acute alcohol intoxication. The repercussions of this bled into Professor Meadow's other cases. So Sally Clark's release prompted the Attorney General, Lord Goldsmith, to review hundreds of other cases, and 2 other women who had been convicted of murdering their children, Donna Anthony and Angela Cannings, had their convictions overturned and they were released from prison as well. Trupti Patel, who was also accused of murdering her 3 children, was acquitted in June 2003. And in each of those cases, Roy Meadow had testified about the unlikelihood of multiple 𝐜𝐸t deaths in a single family. So let's look at the flaws in the evidence. Meadow was only allowed to give evidence in his very specific niche area of expertise, which is pediatrics. So he could give an opinion on whether he thought the presentations of Sally's 2 children's deaths looked like 𝐜𝐸t death and was in keeping with SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome, or not. However, he's not allowed to give an opinion on the statistics, especially things like making comparisons to other statistics, such as his comments about the Grand National. Now, I have to say, I've seen this a few times in my career as an expert witness. I've seen experts go beyond their station, cross their boundaries. So, for example, I assessed the defendant on behalf of the defence in a fitness to plead case in relation to arson last year. And I assessed a middle-aged Polish man who had set fire to a newsagent when he was in like this drunken stupor. But the psychiatrist for the prosecution believed that this man was exaggerating a limp related to an ankle fracture. And I think he was trying to make the defendant look less credible. And even though psychiatrists such as myself and the other expert are medical doctors, and we did go to medical school, we cannot call ourselves experts on physical injuries. He can't do that, and neither can I. So the judge pulled him up on this, and he was chastised by the judge. This judge still did consider his evidence and accepted it, but it felt like the whole thing was a bit kind of tarnished. And in the end, we both had the same opinion anyway, which was the defendant was fit to plead, so the evidence wasn't particularly contentious. I have to say that Meadow's case sent reverberations around the world of medico-legal experts. So to this day, I still hear cautionary tales about this case when I go to conferences or on medico-legal websites or in particular textbooks. Before I tell you my thoughts on the objectivity of the Home Office prosecution forensic pathologist, I just want to quickly introduce you to this YouTube channel. So this is a site for sore minds. My name is Dr. 𝐏𝐬𝐲𝐜𝐡 𝐅𝐸𝐬�00. I'm a consultant forensic psychiatrist. I assess mentally disordered offenders in courts and in prisons and in secure units, assess a whole range of mental illnesses from schizophrenia, bipolar, and I assess people with a range of offences from arson to attempted murder, rape, sometimes murder. This channel that you're watching has videos on a range of topics related to mental illness. Some of them are related to violence and offending because that's my area of expertise, but also some are a bit more kind of general and typical mental illness issues. Sometimes I assess ex-patients, I talk about high-profile cases like this one, but I do my own psychoanalysis. And I think my USP is that I talk about real-life cases of patients that I've assessed, although I keep them anonymous to respect patient confidentiality. So what I'm trying to say in a long-winded way is there's something for everybody on this channel. So, the Home Office prosecution forensic pathologist, he failed to disclose other evidence from microbiological reports and medical tests, which to me highlights a potentially kind of ethically murky area within expert evidence, which is this. No matter who instructs and pays the experts, so whether it's the defence team, the solicitors, or the Crown Prosecution Service, the evidence must be honest and it must be objective. So we have to remember that our reports are for the courts. They're for finding out the truth and they're for justice, and they're not supposed to be for one side or another side to win. And again, I see this a couple of times a year in my work. I see experts who clearly kind of twist the evidence to lean to one side to indicate innocence or guilt. And the problem is pretty basic. It's this, is that some experts are greedy and they want more work. Therefore, they help one side to kind of win their cases, so they get more instructions from that side and basically they earn more money in the long term. So in terms of the consequences, Sir Professor Meadow was eventually effectively barred from court work. And then he found himself being investigated by the GMC, which is the General Medical Council. That's basically your worst nightmare for most doctors. He was being investigated for alleged professional misconduct. So the GMC, the General Medical Council, is a public body that maintains the official register of all medical practitioners in the UK. So basically all doctors who are licensed to practice within the UK have to be on this register, myself included. The GMC's chief responsibility is, and I quote, to protect, promote and maintain the health and safety of the public. So basically what they do is they investigate formal complaints against doctors and they make a decision about whether or not it's appropriate to keep a doctor on the register. So what happened was the GMC Council initially struck off Professor Meadow, though he appealed to the High Court, which in February 2006 ruled in his favour. Now he was very well known, he's knighted, and I wonder whether his reputation and his clout had anything to do with that finding. This is just speculation. And then the GMC itself appealed to the Court of Appeal, but in October 2006, the court upheld that Meadow was not guilty of the charges stated for professional misconduct from the GMC. But despite that, unsurprisingly, it damaged his reputation irreversibly. It was a huge deal at the time, out in all the newspapers, etc. And in 2009, Meadow himself relinquished his registration with the GMC and thus became unlicensed to practice medicine. I'd just like to emphasize that although the vast majority of the medico-legal evidence I come across is decent and objective, occasionally I do see some evidence that I think is poor. And this might be rare, but without wanting to sound too dramatic, as Professor Meadow's case illustrates, I think, in the case of Sally Clark, the potential consequences can actually be quite devastating. So to reflect on this case, this is a tragic case. It shows how damaging professional arrogance can be. And ultimately this led to the unnecessary death of a poor woman who'd already suffered the trauma of losing 2 babies and then separated completely unfairly from a third. And I have to say, on a personal level, it reminds me of how serious the impact of my professional decisions can be. And it forces me to be completely transparent and honest about opinions I can, and crucially about opinions I cannot give as an expert witness. As in the appalling case of Sally Clark, I think getting this wrong, and we can literally do the opposite of letting somebody get away with murder. I hope you've enjoyed this video, hope it's been informative. Please check out everything else on this channel. There's something for everybody. Stay euthymic, and I'll see you soon. Goodbye.